This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
All right, so today we're diving into ancient Egypt.
Ooh, fun.
Specifically, the mysteries surrounding King Tut's death.
Yeah.
And, wow, you've really given us a ton of material here to go through.
Right.
You got videos from the History Channel and articles from the Clickelic and History.com and National Geographic and even some encyclopedia entries.
That's right.
It seems like you're as fascinated with this young pharaoh as everyone else is.
I mean, who isn't? There's so much to unpack.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even with all the research that we have and all the advances that we've made in forensic technology, it's still a puzzle.
Right.
People have been debating it for decades.
Yeah, it really shows how much power these ancient mysteries still hold.
It really does.
So to get into the heart of this mystery,
Okay.
let's start with some background.
All right.
Everyone knows King Tut, but he wasn't some powerful ruler who reigned for a long time or anything.
No.
He became pharaoh at just 9 years old.
9 years old.
Can you imagine having that much responsibility at that age?
I can't even imagine.
And that's not all.
What else?
He came after his father, Akhenaten,
Right.
who basically turned Egyptian society upside down.
Uh-huh.
Akhenaten's religious reforms were radical for the time.
There really were.
He was pushing for monotheism when everyone was polytheistic.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he moved the capital from Thebes to Amarna.
Yeah, he really shook things up.
He totally did.
It's like he was trying to rewrite the rules of society overnight.
Yeah, exactly.
And as cool as that might sound, it actually left Egypt pretty weak
Yeah.
and open to threats from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where Tut's story gets even more interesting.
Okay.
This young kid reverses all of his father's policies.
Really?
Yeah, he brings back all the traditional gods and moves the capital right back to Thebes.
Wow.
Just that alone makes him super historically significant,
Yeah.
even though he was only pharaoh for like 9 years.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it really makes you think, what was it like for a 9-year-old to undo such huge changes?
Yeah, I mean, talk about pressure. And that brings us to the discovery of his tomb
Okay.
in 1922 by Howard Carter.
Yeah.
And that just captured the world's imagination.
Oh, totally. It sparked Tutmania.
Huh?
There's that famous quote from Carter when he first looked inside the tomb.
What's that?
Yes, wonderful things.
Wow.
I get chills just thinking about it. Over 5,000 artifacts preserved for over 3,000 years.
It's crazy, right? He becomes this global icon, not for what he did while he was alive,
Yeah,
but because his tomb was basically untouched.
right.
It's like this incredible window into ancient Egypt.
Yeah, it really is.
But even with all these amazing treasures and everything we've learned from him,
Yeah.
there's still one question that lingers.
What's that?
How did this 19-year-old die?
It's the big question.
There's so much evidence,
Yeah,
but no definitive answer.
right.
And that's why we're here.
Okay, let's get into it.
Let's unpack the big theories.
Right.
And I think we have to start with the one that makes the headlines.
Which is?
Murder.
Oh.
Egyptologist Bob Breyer even said that a head injury that showed up on x-rays could be evidence.
Interesting.
And if it was murder,
Yeah.
there's some interesting suspects.
Like who?
Well, there's I.
Right. Tut's advisor.
And his successor,
Yeah,
he could have done it to take power.
that makes sense.
Or maybe it was Horemheb,
Okay. Tut's military commander.
who also eventually became pharaoh.
Right.
Maybe he got rid of Tut to get rid of a rival.
Interesting.
But wait, there's one more.
Where's that?
Akhenaten.
Tut's wife.
Yeah.
What about her?
Well, she wrote this desperate letter to the Hittite king,
Oh.
refusing to marry a servant.
Right.
So maybe she has something to do with it.
Mm.
Maybe she was trying to be safe, or maybe she wanted power
Okay.
and thought she could get it by working with the Hittites.
It's like an ancient Egyptian soap opera.
Right.
All this palace intrigue and power struggles.
Exactly.
But there's a problem.
What's that?
Later analysis of Tut's mummy in 2005 and then again in 2016 debunked that whole head trauma theory.
Really?
Yes.
So he wasn't murdered?
Well, the damage to his head was probably from the mummification process,
Okay.
not from someone hitting him.
So much for the murder theory.
You know, it's too bad, right? It would made for such a good story.
Yeah, for sure.
So what about the chariot crash?
Oh, yeah. What about that?
I mean, he did have a broken leg
He did.
and some ribs were missing and his heart wasn't there.
Right.
So at first it seemed like maybe he died in some violent accident.
Wow.
Chariots were a big part of life for the elite.
Yeah.
So it's easy to imagine a young pharaoh like Tut pushing his chariot too far.
Yeah, you can totally picture it.
A chariot race gone wrong, a fatal crash.
But there's a catch.
Oh, no.
Remember all those amazing artifacts in his tomb?
Yeah.
Well, it seems like those missing ribs were actually taken out or broken after the tomb was opened.
Oh, wow.
And if it had been a big chariot crash, his skeleton would have way more damage.
So a chariot crashes out.
It seems unlikely.
Okay.
Although maybe a fall or a minor chariot incident could explain the broken leg.
That's true.
Because that broken leg is really the one thing we can't ignore.
I see what you mean.
Because a broken leg, especially a compound fracture like Tut had,
Yeah.
that wouldn't have been a minor injury back then.
Especially in ancient Egypt.
Right.
Infection would have been a huge risk.
Absolutely.
And you know what else is interesting?
Right.
When they analyzed Tut's mummy, they found evidence that he'd had malaria several times.
Oh, wow.
And get this, malaria was everywhere in ancient Egypt.
So what if he broke his leg and then got a bad case of malaria?
That's a good point.
He would have been weak from the injury.
Yeah.
So maybe his body just couldn't fight it off.
The system would have been overwhelmed.
Right.
Totally.
So we've got a pretty good scenario here.
Okay.
A broken leg, maybe not from a chariot crash, but maybe a fall or a small accident.
Right.
Plus a malaria infection.
Okay.
But there's one more thing.
What the?
That's genetics.
Oh, yeah. That's where things get really cool.
Right.
When they analyzed his DNA, they found some wild stuff.
Like what?
Well, he had all these genetic disorders.
Oh, no.
Probably from all the inbreeding in the royal family.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We're talking Marfan syndrome,
Okay.
scoliosis, a cleft palate, even a clubfoot.
Wow. That's a lot to deal with.
It really is.
Even with today's medicine, that would be rough.
For sure.
I can't even imagine trying to rule a kingdom with all that going on.
It makes you realize that he was dealing with a lot more than just political drama. Some experts even think he might have had temporal lobe epilepsy,
Wow.
possibly from his dad's side of family, which could explain those intense religious visions.
That his father and great-grandfather had.
Yeah, exactly.
So not only did he have a broken leg and maybe malaria,
Right.
but also a bunch of genetic conditions.
It's like his death was a combination of all these things,
Yeah.
each playing a part.
Exactly, and that's what makes this so interesting.
It really does.
It makes you look past those simple, sensational explanations and think about how complex human health is.
Yeah, even in ancient times.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah, it really highlights how everything is connected.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like a reminder that history isn't always clear-cut. It's like life,
Exactly.
full of gray areas.
It makes you think even with all our fancy modern medicine, we're still vulnerable to so much.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, the people in the ancient world had to deal with diseases and injuries.
Right.
And best genes.
Yeah, just like we do today.
It's a powerful reminder that we all share that.
I've been thinking about Tut as we've been talking.
Yeah.
What do you think it was like for him in those last few days?
Oh, man.
This young guy, barely 19 years old,
Yeah.
carrying the weight of an entire kingdom,
Right.
dealing with physical pain,
Uh-huh.
and not knowing if he was going to live or die.
It's hard to imagine. He's
Right.
surrounded by all these advisors and people in the court, but ultimately he's alone with all that.
And don't forget all that political chaos he got from his dad.
Oh, yeah, he had to deal with that too.
He's not only dealing with his own problems,
Right.
but he's also trying to fix a broken kingdom.
It's really tragic when you think about it.
It is.
But even with his short reign
Yeah.
and all the mysteries surrounding his death, he left a mark on history.
That's for sure.
And I think a lot of that has to do with all the amazing things they found in his tomb.
Oh, totally.
The golden mask, the chariots, all the treasures.
Yeah.
They give us this tangible connection to ancient Egypt.
It's one thing to read about ancient Egypt, but it's another thing to see those objects.
Right.
To imagine the people who made them and used them.
It's like going back in time.
And it's not just how beautiful they are, but the scale of it all.
I know.
The sheer ambition of ancient Egyptian civilization.
Right.
Like the pyramids,
Yeah.
the temples.
The hieroglyphics.
It's mind-blowing.
They're not just projects.
I know.
They show how smart and persistent people were,
Yeah.
especially without all the tools and technology we have now.
It really makes you wonder,
About what?
what else is out there?
Hidden under the sand, just waiting to be discovered.
I know, it's exciting to think about.
It is?
And while we keep searching for those secrets,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good to stop and think about what we've already covered.
Yeah, we've done a lot in this deep dive.
We've talked about the evidence and all the main theories,
Right.
the historical context.
We even talked about the curse of the pharaohs,
Yeah.
which is totally a myth,
I know.
but it's still a cool story.
Yeah, it is.
But through it all, I keep thinking about how things come together.
Yeah.
How things that seem totally unrelated
Yeah.
can actually cause something to happen.
Yeah.
It's like a reminder to think about things from different angles.
Right.
To look for those little connections that might not be obvious at first.
Because a lot of times the most interesting answers are in those unexpected connections.
Right.
Where science and history meet.
Yeah.
Where facts and myths mix together.
Where logic and intuition collide.
That's what makes exploring so fun.
It's not always about getting a definite answer.
It's about the journey.
Yeah, putting the pieces together.
Exactly.
Speaking of putting pieces together,
Yeah.
we've been talking a lot about the theories around his death.
Right.
But we haven't really talked about Tut as a person.
Yeah, you're right.
He wasn't just a king.
Right.
He was a human being.
A teenager even.
Right.
So what do our sources say about him?
Well, it's interesting.
What is?
We mostly know him from his tomb.
Yeah.
All that grandeur.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to see the real person.
The boy behind the golden mask,
Right.
and what we know suggests he was probably pretty frail.
From all those genetic conditions?
Yeah.
Like he needed a cane to walk,
Right.
but he liked hunting and archery?
Typical stuff for young guys back then.
Right.
There's even a theory that he was buried with throwing sticks. Yeah, because he wasn't strong enough to use a bow.
Wow.
It changes how you see him, right?
Yeah,
It's easy to think of him as this powerful pharaoh, but he was just a young man dealing with some pretty tough stuff.
And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting.
What do you mean?
It's not just about finding facts.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with the human story behind them.
And his story has been captivating people for thousands of years.
I know.
There's just something about Tutankhamun. It's like he goes beyond time and culture.
Maybe it's the mystery, the
Yeah.
tragedy of dying so young.
Or maybe it's that glimpse into a world of power and luxury.
Whatever it is, he still has us hooked.
He really does.
So as we finish up our deep dive into King Tut's death,
Yeah.
I'm left feeling amazed and wanting to learn more.
Me too.
It shows that there's always more to learn,
Mm.
more to discover,
Yeah.
even about something that seems so familiar.
It's true. Yeah, it really makes you realize that history is more than just names and dates. Right.
It's about people,
Mm.
their lives,
Yeah.
their stories.
And sometimes those stories are full of mystery,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
even thousands of years later.
Exactly.
And that's a great point to wrap up our deep dive into King Tut's death.
I think so, too.
We've gone over all the evidence and the theories and the historical context,
We really have.
but in the end, we still don't know for sure how he died.
And maybe that's okay.
You think so?
I do.
Why?
Because it's the search for answers that's so exciting.
That's a good point.
It makes us think critically about the past.
I like that.
And it keeps things interesting.
It does.
So before we go, I have one last thing for everyone to think about.
Okay, what is it?
What if we could go back in time
Okay.
and ask King Tut himself how he died?
Ooh, that's a good one.
What do you think he'd say?
I think he'd probably just smile.
Yeah.
Say that, my friends, is for you to figure out.
I love that.
Right?
He might even say the journey is just as important as the destination. Totally. And that's what we've been trying to do in this deep dive.
Right.
We may never know all the answers,
Yeah.
but trying to figure them out, that's what makes history so fascinating.
Exactly. So to everyone listening,
Yes.
keep asking questions, keep searching for answers,
Yeah.
and keep your minds open to new ideas,
You never know what you might find.
especially when it comes to ancient Egypt.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into King Tut's death.
Of course it was fun.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Bye, everyone.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.